In 1987, few people could have realised at the time that a game would be released in arcades that would have a cataclysmic effect on the future of video games. That a game would be released that would change how games were played, how games were viewed by non-gamers, and how the future of competitive gaming would be player versus player in real time. Each legend needs a humble beginning, and for the greatest one-on-one fighting franchise in history, that beginning would come in the form of Street Fighter by Capcom. Street Fighter was the first competitive fighting game released by Capcom, and this game went on to be a huge commercial success. It introduced new standards on graphics, sound and playability, and formed the very bedrock of how fighting games would be configured, from the inclusion of 6 attack buttons, to the use of intricate joystick movements and button presses to execute moves. The game was conceived and developed by a gifted young designer called Takashi Nishiyama, who had previously worked at Irem and was the brains behind Kung Fu Master. The game drew on some of the same influences Takashi used for Kung Fu Master, such as the Bruce Lee movie Game of Death, and the more recent arcade fighting games, such as Karate Champ and GR Kung Fu. The player competes in one-on-one matches against a series of computer-controlled opponents, or in a single match against another player. Each match consists of 3 rounds in which the player must knock out an opponent in less than 30 seconds. If a match ends before a fighter is knocked out, the fighter with the greater amount of energy left is declared the winner. The player must win 2 rounds in order to defeat the opponent and proceed to the next battle. The game came in 2 formats, one with 6 buttons for attack, and another that featured pressure-sensitive pads. The harder you hit the pad, the more powerful the blow to your opponent. The player uses the joystick to move left or right, and to jump, crouch and block. By using the attack buttons and pads in combination with the joystick, the player can perform a variety of attacks, from standing, jumping or crouching positions. 3 special techniques require a specific series of joystick and button inputs. This is the first game to use such a concept. Unlike other fighting games, the specific commands for these special moves are not given in the arcade game's instruction card, which instead encourages the player to discover these techniques. Takashi originally wanted the game to emphasise more on timing of moves and storytelling, but the chiefs at Capcom wanted to focus more on combat, and so he couldn't fully realise his ambition for the game, and so he would need to wait a few more years to fully realise his vision. The game can be played as a 1 or 2 player versus game, with only Ryu and Ken being available to the player, depending on what side you use. The single player mode is made up of a series of battles against 10 opponents from 5 different nations. The player can choose to start in one of 4 nations, with each nation having 2 opponents. This happens until all 4 nations have been beaten, and then the final 2 rounds take place in Thailand. To have a respite from the fighting, there are bonus stages in the game. One sees you pounding the buttons to generate strength to break a pile of bricks, and the other is a wood breaking challenge. To have played the original Street Fighter in the arcades was a thing of joy. The sprites seemed absolutely huge for the time, and the varied backgrounds looking fairly traditional for the nation they were representing. With the Great Wall in the background of this China setting, and Mount Rushmore from the USA. And then there are the character portraits between bouts. I remember thinking it looked a little like the tail of the tape bits from the boxing, and the map screen was a nice touch also. After the bout, you get to do a little trash talking to your opponent as he sits there with a battered face. The sound is a little muffled and unintelligible pretty much throughout the whole game. When pulling off special moves, Ryu yells something, but you can't really make it out. But the trash talking is pretty cool, and it's displayed as text as well to help you understand. The music was a little loud and brash, to be honest. None of the tunes are actually any good. And then when fighting, once you add in the unintelligible speech, the pretty bad thump sound effects, the whole thing just sounds like a mess really. But where Street Fighter shines is in the playability. I have seen a few retro gamers on YouTube that say, "Street Fighter, why was it so bad?" Or, "Street Fighter is no longer horrid." And while everyone is entitled to their opinion, I totally disagree with that view. In fact, I would go so far as to say that comments like that come from someone who's probably only ever played Street Fighter after they have played Street Fighter 2. As if they had played Street Fighter when it was fresh and new, they would see it for the gem that it really is. But that's not to say it's the best game ever. But taken in context, when you look at this game's competition, there was things like Way of the Exploding Fist, ER Kung Fu, Karate Champ, and International Karate. And none of them had anything like the combat system Capcom used in Street Fighter. When you play Street Fighter, the fights can be over a little quickly, I do admit that. Especially when connecting with the Cyclone Punch. About 3 of these is enough to see off most opponents. But the pace of the action is also so fast that fights can seem like a blur. But in these days of one-on-one fighters, it was a case of hit and run and defend. There were no counters, no parries or the like, so you would typically go in all guns blazing. But with 3 different punch and 3 different kick strengths, the player felt more empowered, more in control of the moves they were executing. And speaking of executing moves, another criticism I hear is that the controls are rubbish, as they can't pull off a dragon punch or cyclone punch. But again, I think people that say that are trying to pull off the moves like at Street Fighter 2, and if you do, they won't work. The trick here is to include each direction as if it were a button press in sequence. So when doing a cyclone punch, do not press punch until you have fully depressed towards, and then it should work each and every time. The other great thing about the playability of Street Fighter is that the opponents all have various different styles and disciplines. When compared to Karate Champ, where everyone is the same, or Year Kung Fu, where the opponents have an unfair advantage as they usually have a weapon, in this game, each opponent is more or less equal. One tactic will not work on everyone, and so you need to fight your opponent's style and lure them in to make a mistake or misplaced attack. This was a game I did enjoy playing in arcades whenever I could, which would usually be when the shows came into town. I never seen it in the Lagoon or any chippies, but when I did see it, there was usually a crowd watching someone showcase some real skill and talent. So I would watch on, trying to pick up pointers where I could, until I got a version for the Commodore 64. I was curious though as to how a game with 6 buttons would translate to a single button joystick, but I would find out in time. The version of Street Fighter we poor folk in the UK got was this travesty, and I knew it was going to be rubbish before I even plugged in my joystick. Yes, this game was coded by Teartex, a pseudonym for garbage all over the world. But I felt I may have been a bit harsh, but then when I started playing it, I knew I wasn't harsh enough. Just have a look at this. This is Street Fighter. Allegedly. The characters are hard to separate from the backgrounds, and so it looks like at times they just blend into the background. The sound is atrocious, and the moves, well, it's more blind luck than skill when you pull anything off. And these character portraits, they're just so bad. The combat is so woolly, disconnected from the player in some way. You can never tell when a strike will connect with your opponent, but I will say this. The bouts seem to last longer than the arcade version, but that just prolongs the pain. The day I got this, I had to wear my disappointed face. But then, I knew it would be a hard game to port. But before I had abandoned all hope, word started to spread around my schoolmates that another port of Street Fighter was available, and it was a million miles better than the UK one. Could such a thing be true? And this was that version, all the way from the US of A, and it certainly does look a lot better. At least the title card looks like the arcade version. The presentation was a lot better as well. So how did it play? Well, at the time, I do remember it playing a lot better than the UK version. But for this video, I couldn't get the game to run at all, no matter what I tried. Switching joystick ports, using the keyboard as a joystick, but no, nothing, which is a little disappointing to say the least. But I hope that you trust me on this. It was better than the UK version. But overall, the home ports of Street Fighter were not much to write home about, and after the success of the arcade version, you knew Capcom would work on making a sequel. And that sequel surprised just about everyone, even Capcom. But that will be a video for another time. In closing, Street Fighter is a great game, and it maybe gets lost a little in the shadow of its sequels, but it should definitely not be dismissed as a bad game. It's a game that gets better with each iteration for sure, but for me, it still remains a classic, and always will. And that was my look back at Street Fighter. If you like this video, then please do give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.
Brooklyn, the Stone Cold Ceremony goes all over the world.